You're listening to The Local Maximum, episode 300.
Time to expand your perspective. Welcome to The Local Maximum. Now, here's your host, Max Sklar.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome. You have reached another Local Maximum. Today, I am joined by Aaron once again for episode 300. How are you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing as well as one can in these times, these troubled times.
Yeah, I often have said that over the last week, and I wanted to talk about this war in Israel and this war in Gaza over last week, but I felt like I couldn't get it out yet. So I hope that the episode on Web3 with Sam went over well, of course, maybe people will go back to it. I enjoyed speaking with him, but today we have to talk about this topic. This is why sometimes big things happen in the news, and we kind of want to brush it off and just focus on building on this show, but this is one that I felt like I really can't brush off, and it would be helpful to talk about it. And thank you for coming on, to make sure that I don't say anything stupid. But we're going to give it a shot, because I think it's one of those events. I think we covered other events that we certainly covered COVID. We certainly covered, the rioting in 2020 as it was happening. I don't think
the start of the war in Ukraine.
We covered that. So we do cover things. Those January 6th, a little bit on that episode that doesn't mention January 6th by name, but it's decentralization before our eyes, that I think has aged very well. This let me just start by kind of trying to describe what happens, and then what happened last week, and then
just for those listening in the future, we are recording on October 15th, so some of this information could change, or perspective on it could change in the very near future, so just dropping a pin in that where we are at the moment.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I mean, I listened to a bunch of podcasts and read a bunch of articles before doing this. And one of them was, I think it was like Pod Save America, where they were going, oh, yeah. And, this attack led to, 250 Israeli deaths. And, I was like, oh, this is very early on, because we later learned it was well into the thousands, between 1 and 2,000. But essentially, Hamas, attacked Israel proper from the Gaza Strip, and a whole lot of their guys, their terrorists, came in, and this was actually on a Jewish holiday of Simchas Torah. A lot of people don't know that, or maybe the day before Simchas Torah. I always forget what that one's called. But it was also nearly 50 years to the day after the Yom Kippur War. This holiday, Simchas Torah, is like, I think, 2 weeks after Yom Kippur on the Hebrew calendar. But as it turns out, because the calendars differ and they kind of run around each other a little bit, sometimes the Hebrew calendar is past the Gregorian calendar, sometimes it's before the Gregorian calendar. This ends up lining just about 50 years after that war. And there's no accident that this thing starts during a religious holiday. Even though this time it's one that's less well known, but things do shut down during that time, particularly in Israel. For me, I think one of the comparisons to 9/11 that I want to make is I had the feeling after 9/11 that these terrorists were like, one of those sinking feelings is that they will target everybody. It was just like wanton mass killing of whoever they could get their hands on, basically on 9/11 and in this.
Yeah, and there's certainly a sense that nothing is safe. Right.
It's like they'll kill us all if they could.
And Israel is a little bit different in the sense that they've been living with semi-random rocket attacks for decades. So right. There's not really a sense that anywhere in the state of Israel is untouchable. But ground incursions and gun battles on the streets is not something that I think anyone was anticipating in these areas, and that has changed.
It's easy to forget, and I mean, I know that people who live there with the with the rockets, we know that they go into shelters, and they have this iron dome that often takes care of the rockets. When you kind of hear the news on that year after year, and then you hear about this iron dome, and it doesn't seem like, I'm sure if your house got hit by a rocket, that's a lot of damage for you, but it doesn't seem like, just looking at it from afar, for us, it doesn't have that same psychological effect. It feels like, oh, those rockets are just making some kind of statement. It's not like, oh, well, I'm just trying to take out as many as possible. They don't seem designed for that.
In a lot of ways, it's become analogous to, well, if you live in the Midwest, you deal with tornadoes, and it's just kind of a fact of life. And it's in most of our reactions to it, it's kind of been sanitized away of who's doing what and why. The tornadoes are not adversarial, right?
Like this kind of issue. By that I mean, if the rockets aren't working for years and years, you should have seen it coming. Well, eventually they're going to find a way around it. And so the craziness this time, whereas not 9/11 was random, maximal killing, but it was kind of at a distance, right? It was sort of just we're going to fly these planes. I guess it was not at a distance inside those planes in some
Fair
degree.
enough, yeah.
But in this case, it was and there are other podcasts that go through this. We've all seen the images on Twitter, but it was just, face to face, door to door, children, elderly. And of course, we've all seen that, that music festival, and hostages brought back to Gaza, and who knows what, hell they're being put through right now.
Yeah, it's I can't even imagine what that must be like. It's a level of intimacy to the violence that I hope I never have to experience.
Yeah, I know. It kind of makes you realize that we live in extraordinary times, and for us, an extraordinary place in the U.S. where for you and me, having been born, in the Northeast U.S. in the 80s, we haven't really had to experience anything like the kind of human brutality that has occurred.
The closest thing would be for people of our generation would be those who served abroad in the global war on terror, and it's a little bit different when you're there as part of a military unit than when it's coming to where you live. So it's
right.
Not completely divorced, and probably the closest analog for our generation, but still not the same.
But also, unlike our grandfather's generation, my grandfather's generation, and unlike what's happening in Israel right now, the reality is most of us were not involved in the global war on terror. Most of us were not asked to join in on the global war on terror. We were not told that this was an particularly important thing that I needed to do for my country right now, and I don't know necessarily why that is, other than they didn't really seem to need us. That was the sense I got at the time.
Yeah, and for those who aren't aware, the state of Israel does have essentially universal service in the armed forces, or some sort of national service. The armed services being the most common form, and so the vast majority of the population that is of age either has served and is currently in the reserves, or has a direct familial connection to people who are either currently serving or potentially could be called up. So very different in the United States, where I don't know off the top of my head what the percentage is, but I would guess that it's in the low single-digit percentages of people who are actually have served in our armed forces, or are nuclear family members of those who do. So we have had the privilege and perhaps the danger of being so many degrees of separation away from the fact that is the brutality and the violence of war, that for most of us it's something we see on television, and we see, smart bomb, the if you think back to the first Gulf War, smart bombs dropping down chimneys, and surgical strikes, and that's what we think of. And it's rare that we get exposed to the brutality. I feel like is being overused and doesn't do justice to it. But the brutality of war, that the things that we're seeing going on in Palestine and Israel right now, that's what war is, and we've become we fooled ourselves into thinking that it's something cleaner than that, and that it's possible to have a just a war that doesn't involve war crimes, and that's I would say the exception rather than the rule, that something can escalate to this level and not involve war crimes, potentially from both sides, that bad things are going to happen on both sides of this equation here. And I wish we hadn't gotten to this point, but I can't wish my way out of it either.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. A slight thing to add to that, though, is that every war is very different. Like, the Russia-Ukraine war has been, yes, it's been brutal. It's been, very dislocating for Ukrainians in particular. But the Russians don't go in there doing the types of things that Hamas is doing, or I guess has done in Israel.
No, but you have heard of people, of Russians basically going door to door and executing every, adult male, and
I haven't
maybe
heard
going
that.
beyond that. And it was I think you particularly heard about that when they were like pulling out of cities that they were losing. And I certainly haven't done the work to verify those stories.
Yeah,
but
it feels like you get a lot of false stories during war, and the only things that we can go, especially, it seems like, and maybe this is just my bias, it seems like war crimes against Israel are questioned the most, and there has to be at this point, it's just, there's so much overwhelming, like in-person video and eyewitness affidavits. Like, you have to get everything, and you're like, okay, this is really happening. But
it certainly seems like there's a serious danger of regardless of
but people
what
are gonna
military
make stuff up
action are taken on the ground, that Israel loses the PR war here.
Yeah.
And you're already seeing some of that. There was so I don't want to get too far into the details on some of the events that have been not accused, alleged, but there was a particular one involving the beheading of infants that there was a claim of, made from several sources, and the latest reporting I've heard on that is that, well, the IDF is declining to confirm those, which now makes everyone say, oh, then does that mean it's fake news, that it's all rumors and unsubstantiated? And the statement from the IDF, the way I read it, was mostly that we have a war to fight here. Our job is not to go around doing investigative reporting. If you want to send in investigators later, that's fine, but that's not what we're focused on at the moment. Which I think is entirely reasonable. There's an argument to be said that if you're using these reports to motivate and calibrate your reactions, then you want to be fairly confident in them. But also, the IDF is not CSI Israel.
Yeah, and it matters in the historical record, but it doesn't, like, what's it supposed to be like? I guess it matters.
Well, right.
At the end of the information war.
At the end of the day, if the result is that, well, no, there actually weren't any babies beheaded, they were just killed. Okay, so maybe we got something wrong there, but does that all of a sudden make it okay? So it's not a big deal anymore. No, but there's the danger of becoming hyper focused on the specific details here and losing the thread of what actually did happen and the significance of it.
I feel like that's an aspect of the information war we have these days that is just
absolutely,
it's just so frustrating.
It's and this is not something unique to this conflict or to one side or the other here, but it's absolutely a propaganda tactic to, if you can't disprove what happened, then just disprove a tiny piece of what you're being accused of. And by if you can disprove one count, then by not in a legal sense or a logical sense, but in a public relations sense, it throws everything else into doubt.
Gotcha.
And
Gotcha.
so that is definitely in play here.
I see.
And I should not be as shocked as I am to see it.
Yeah. All right. So I another comparison to 9/11, I think that the psychological effect inside Israel will be similar. I think you're seeing the society that had been divided for a long time is very unified on this. And from what I hear, and this is all qualitative, like, there's a big culture of like helping out and chipping in, and people are flying back to Israel to join the military. So it's not like, oh no, I'm being called drafted. How do I get out of it? It's the kind of thing where, like, I'm pretty sure there was a draft in World War II here, right? But I also think it was like, people were, they probably didn't need one in that sense. I don't think the psychological effect will be as pronounced here in the United States, just because we've been so far from it. That's just the way it is.
I'd say one interesting difference. So there's the population, the populace is unifying together to support each other.
By the way, before you get into hold that thought, the Fourth Turning book that I'm reading now says this kind of thing happens in the Fourth Turning, where the society is so divided and then sees a threat and turns on a dime. We haven't seen that yet in the U.S., but what Neil Howe's book is talking about applies to Israel, seems to apply almost perfectly right now.
Yeah, so as you can say that they're pulling together both on the civil and the political side. And part of that is the formation of a coalition government. Netanyahu's war cabinet, which involves not just the his party was at Likud, but also what would have essentially been the opposition party.
The head of the opposition party is named Benny Gantz. Is one of them. He was the blue and white party, and just would not. He refused.
He was a former general in the IDF, wasn't he?
Yeah. So he refused.
Or Minister of Defense or something.
He refused to join the Netanyahu government for many years. Another one is Yair Lapid. I don't think he's in the war cabinet yet, but he's a TV host. Probably better to get the general than the TV host. But that's nothing against Yair Lapid. I'm not going to get involved in. I guess I'm already talking about the nitty gritty of Israeli politics, but so
the interesting.
So it would be like
between.
It would be like
go ahead.
there was a war in the U.S. and the president shuffled the cabinet to take equally from both parties or something like that.
So the big difference, I think, one of the big differences between the U.S. reaction to 9/11 and what we're seeing in Israel now is that post 9/11, the president, George W. Bush, saw a huge boost in his popularity and his approval ratings. While the people of Israel appear to be unified behind their government, they are not unified behind Netanyahu. And in fact, I think I saw something like 80-something% of people in Israel blame him for what happened. So that's an interesting dynamic, and I don't think we're going to see the fallout from that in the short term. I guess it depends how long this war goes on. But whenever the next election gets called, I would not be shocked to see him thrown out as repercussion for that. And maybe his party won't pay the price, but he will. But again, I'm getting way out over my skis in speculating on Israeli politics. I just thought that was an interesting divergence there. It
is very interesting, and it'll be interesting to like that could change depending on how the next few weeks and months go.
Right, he could still come out of this, a hero for how he conducts himself in the government, or he could be putting the nail in his political career's coffin.
Yeah. So when this first happened, I didn't think I would be impacted personally, but then I saw all of the, as I scrolled Facebook, which I haven't done in a long time, I didn't realize how many people I knew, have friends and family over there, and how many people have, know people who were either killed or wounded or taken prisoner over there. So that was kind of crazy. And as it just so happens, I don't think I had interviewed guests. I've had Israeli guests on the show, but I don't think I've interviewed guests who were in Israel until recently. And recently I had two. One, I already did the interview, so that's going to go out soon in the next few weeks. And another one, he had to postpone the interview. Hopefully we'll get to do it at some point, but I'm kind of in this situation where, I'm not going to say who it is, but it wasn't the guest himself. It was like his representative at the company telling me. So I'm like, oh, what's happening over here? He could be called up to a military service for all I know, I don't know. So that was, that was pretty crazy, where it was like, oh, this is actually closer to home than, I should have known that this would be closer to home than I expected, but it ended up being, I know that doesn't matter. Oh, I have to postpone my my podcast interview, but it's not a complaint. It's just like an observation.
Yeah, for sure. It makes it much more real when even if it's the personal impact to you is not a huge deal, but that you are just that 1 degree separated from what's actually going on there.
Yeah, exactly. And to me, I had visited Ukraine, I think of a couple years, 3 years before the invasion. So I already had that kind of like, that kind of group that I had been in touch with there. And so I felt with that. Israel, obviously, I'd been there in 2000, as a Jew, I just know so many people in Israel or connected with Israel. I'm not someone who has like tons of friends in Israel or tons of connections in Israel. I probably know a few people, but that's about it. But that second degree separation was a lot larger than I realized.
Yeah. And it's kind of impressive given that Israel only has a population of 9-10 million.
Yeah.
But there's that makes for a lot of connections.
Yeah. All right. So what happens next? That's my next thing. We are going to go through the entire history here. All right. Ready to stay up for 100 hours at a time? No, let's do the best we can. Okay. Because I know quite a bit of history here. Unfortunately, a lot of that history research was motivated by the type of reaction that we're currently seeing in terms of like these, this sort of pro-Hamas rhetoric that I've heard over the years. And so I've had to do a lot of research on this topic. And yeah, there sometimes some of the things that Israeli supporters put out are not quite fair or correct, but oftentimes the anti-Israel talking points are unfair, incorrect, and sometimes it's just like name calling, like settler colonialist apartheid, which doesn't have any real meaning. It's just a way of like using words to sort of get people sort of how should I put this? Using words that you're not defining well to get what you want. I don't know if that's the best way.
It's much like the calling someone a racist or a Nazi has been almost entirely devalued in modern American dialogue. That we've seen something like that with a lot of these buzzwords in the context of Israel and Palestine.
Yeah. So I guess the big question now to what happens next, and then we'll get into a little bit of the history, is a ground invasion of Gaza, which seems like it's inevitable, like it's going to happen. Is it unavoidable? Is it possible not to do it? Because a ground invasion of Gaza is going to be very costly. I think the IDF knows that. But oftentimes these things end up being far worse than you even think. almost like when you remodel your house, it ends up costing 4 or 5 times as much. Sorry guys, I hate doing that. You need a little gallows humor, this time. I don't see a way of avoiding it, and you know that.
Yeah, and Gaza is particularly ill-suited to a ground invasion, being that it is. I think I heard somewhere that it's one of the most densely populated, parts, if not of the world, at least of that region.
Of the region.
It's
not it has nothing on New York City, but
yeah, but it's highly urbanized, in terms of high-rise buildings, and we're not talking residential houses with front and back lawns and white picket fences. And so
although I looked on the map, there are a few of those. And I was honestly surprised by when they showed videos of the evacuation, how many kind of nice cars there were. And I'm not reading too much into that, but those could be Hamas cars. But I had a different image in my head from what words we were getting to describe the place.
Well, and it sounds like they've been bombing aggressively for the last couple of days, but even if they quote unquote level sections of it before they send in ground troops, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be booby traps and ambushes everywhere. That kind of urban fighting is going to have very high casualty rates, and I don't
sometimes the rubble is going to make it harder. And again, I'm not in the military. You're not in the military. This should be this is probably. It's not like we're telling the IDF stuff they don't already know.
Right. Well, and the other highly speculative piece that I'm sure the IDF and the War Cabinet is trying to triangulate on is what rate of casualties, what rate and what number, net is the Israeli public willing to tolerate? Because there could very well come a point where even if they're making positive progress, if they're losing, hundreds of lives a day, that people say it's not worth it, back out, and that might even end worse, because the alternative to sending in a ground forces might be to step up the bombing in a way that's even worse for the folks inside. The other challenge is they've dropped leaflets and instructed folks in a particular zone. I think it's the northern half of the strip to evacuate. I've heard allegations, rumors that Hamas is not allowing them to evacuate. I've heard that. I believe that the Gaza Strip shares a border with Egypt.
Right.
And
but if
so,
you're evacuating,
but Egypt has said that they are not opening the border with a humanitarian corridor to allow mass evacuation. So even if the people in Gaza are willing and able, they've essentially said, okay, squeeze your population into the southern half so that we can commence ground operations in the northern half. And that is not an easy lift.
No,
and they're certainly not doing it without complications from their internal elements.
Yeah, the southern half is less populated than the northern half, and I've heard this. There's a lot of questions of well, how difficult is it to evacuate a city? And so there's been some, comparisons to evacuating a city during a hurricane, which, we do from time to time. But that's sort of hard when you have bombs flying. And I think Hamas put something out saying oh, Israel is bombing the roads that people are using to leave. But then that turned out to seemingly be fake news. But of course, it was going around on Twitter a bunch. But who knows? There's going to be a lot of news coming out of that.
The black pill take, which I don't know how realistic this is or not, but I'm afraid it is highly accurate, is that it's in Hamas's interest to prevent people from evacuating, to maximize Palestinian casualties in the bombing and the ground war, because that will that will activate increased sympathy and support internationally for their situation.
That's the game theory of this war, and it's
and they've certainly given the impression that they are willing to. That certainly Hamas leadership, particularly the ones who are over in, was it Doha,
Yeah.
that they are willing to spend as many Palestinian lives as it takes to advance their campaign, because it's not their lives, and that's highly cynical, and a little accusatory, but I have yet to be convinced that it's not the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see any evidence otherwise. I think, and yeah, so I often, to try to understand this evacuation, I often try to take the Gaza Strip and try to overlay it on top of the towns where I live. So I could probably use Connecticut as an example for you and me, but maybe for those who live somewhere else, try to think of what 25 miles means. In southern Connecticut, 25 miles means essentially Stamford, where I live, up northish, mostly east. Let's say Stamford to Bridgeport is about 25 miles. So they're evacuating Bridgeport and Fairfield and telling everybody you have to move west. So it's like 2 towns worth of people. You can drive it easily. There'll be plenty of traffic. Walking it, you can walk 1 town in Connecticut, not a problem. If you're really on the edge of Bridgeport over there, that's going to be quite a trek. So there is that 1 town in the Gaza Strip that's all the way on the end. I forgot what it's called, where there's actually there's actually quite a bit of bombing going on right now, because I think there's a lot of Hamas fighters there. I'm going to open up my Google Maps now to try to identify that. And so if you live there, that would be, and you have to go by foot, that would be that would be a 25-mile trek. But hopefully you get Beit Hanun is the name of it. It's basically right in the corner there. You could, hopefully once you get through Gaza, even if you're not at the river yet, hopefully, you're at least in a safer spot, but I don't know exactly how that works. But yeah, that if you look at the map here, that whole northern part of Gaza is all city.
Yeah, that appears to be the densest part.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And, I am kind of waiting to be convinced, a lot of libertarians out there, I have a lot of contact with, often think, ground invasion is never, is never the answer, is never, or something like that. But I just don't see, when pushed, they're like, well, Israel just has to kind of write off the hostages and just say, well, sucks for them, and then sort of retreat and then hope for the best. First of all, no country would do that. Secondly, I don't even they'll argue, well, no country's ever done it, but once they do it, it ends up being a really great strategy. Just, I find that hard to believe.
I know not all libertarians are slaves to the non-aggression principle, but the question that is begged here is, okay, so if you don't initiate aggression, what happens when you are aggressed against? What is the appropriate action? And maybe they would say, well, you need to go to an impartial mediator, a third-party enforcement organization. And let's just say that the UN, in its attempt to fulfill that role, has been highly ineffective.
Yeah. Well, they would also say, in fact,
the UN is one of the major sources of funding and organization and regulation of Palestine.
Right.
They are a party to the problem here.
Right. Well, they'd also go back in history and frame Israel as the aggressor as well.
Sure. Yeah. You can reframe any way you want.
But I mean, when it comes to geopolitical actors, there's always this. There's no geopolitical actor that hasn't been in the game except for very isolated countries. Anyway, I don't want to get into a whole long thing about that. Those could be debates and debates and debates and debates. A little bit of Gaza history, a lot of us think of Gaza as this these poor guys in this city that's just constantly under control of Hamas and just being pounded by bombs. Gaza was an important trading and cultural port for many years. And if you look at the map, it makes a lot of sense. Like if I didn't see the country boundaries and I was just looking for real estate, like it's the last metropolitan area as you go south in the Mediterranean before you get to the Sinai Peninsula, which is a desert. So from a real estate perspective, Donald Trump would probably say this, these guys, they got really great real estate. It should be prosperous, and it should be kind of more metropolitan and not a single party dictatorship. So I looked into this. It turns out there's been Jews have lived there. There's been a Jewish presence there from the 1st century BC up until 1929. It wasn't that Jews were the majority there, but it was like, hey, this was a city where, like most trading cities, people of a lot of different, religions and backgrounds would come and work
like
together.
Much of the Holy Land.
Yeah. And so basically Jews were there from the 1st century BC, I don't have an exact year, up until 1929. There was this riot in 1929 where they were forced to leave, which, I mean, that's a whole other rabbit hole, but imagine having a riot so bad you're forced to leave the city. That we're not talking like the American riots. And then
well, the closest analog I can think of is oh gosh, what was the
Wall Street?
The riot? The
Tulsa.
Thank you, Tulsa. Yeah, I was gonna say the destruction of the Black Wall Street. Which I imagine would be somewhat comparable.
Okay, so then Israel's established in 1948. There was that war in 1967 where they took over the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt after winning, and then next year established settlements both in the Sinai and in the Gaza Strip again. But when you look at it that way, it's like, okay, a lot of times these are and I'm not saying that these settlements are all a good idea, and I understand that there's like a problem where you put a little enclave in territory that is at least possibly supposed to become a foreign country someday, or supposed to become autonomous someday. That obviously is going to cause problems. But the idea of this being like total outsiders, coming in who are just foreign colonials, when like within living memory of 1968, you had that presence there. It kind of paints that a little differently. So anyway, just some food for thought. I don't know what difference that makes, but anyway, so in 2009 those settlements were scrapped, and so this is what happened in the early 2000s. So I was there in 2000, and when I was there in the summer 2000, the situation felt a lot like it did a few weeks ago, where it was like they're really close to peace and they're just about to seal the deal. Because when I was there, Bill Clinton was working with Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat. They were finally hammering out an agreement. They were at Camp David while I was there, and it seemed like it was going well. We now know it was not going well at all.
Just to clarify something you said before, I think you said the settlements were scrapped in 2009, but I think your notes say 2005.
Oh, okay. Did I say 9? No, 5. So I'm gonna go right. So right. So and again, I don't want to go into like all the causes and whatever, but Second Intifada breaks out in 2000, towards the tail end of 2000, and you just have these bombings in Israel, and then tit for tat, obviously. And it just keeps going on, and there doesn't seem to be a solution. And the best solution they could come up with, which, was a very imperfect solution, was we're going to build a giant wall in the West Bank, and which I'm hoping people are a little bit up to speed on where all these places are. I assume that some people are not, but we don't have time to do the whole thing. And then for the Gaza Strip, we're just going to take out all our settlements, resettle them somewhere else, and we're just going to let them have it, even though there's no peace agreement and we're still technically at war. And so it's been a little much more quiet there since, except for, those rockets and stuff. So that was not so then 2005, it's kind of left to its own. Hamas takes over in 2007. after they kind of win an election in 2006, but then there hasn't been an election held again. Very, very hard to understand situation. But the situation with the Palestinian government was that there's a president who was elected in 2005. That's Mahmoud Abbas. It was a 4-year term. There hasn't been an election since. He's 87 years old. I think that's another thing that's going on now where people realize he's old and there's no obvious successor. And he's been there for 20 years. That's historically, that's always an iffy prospect when you have that. And then Gaza
we complain enough in the U.S. about the likely candidates for our next presidential election are so old, but that's a very different dynamic than having someone who's been in the position for nearly 20 years. And when they pass, that's going to be a huge power vacuum. Right.
So 2006, Hamas wins those elections for the parliament, but that's not a presidential election. So you have divided government. So they have a mini civil war. Hamas gets control of the Gaza
Strip. Do they have control over? I guess it's the Palestinian Authority is ostensibly the government which Hamas controls. Now, do they have jurisdiction?
No. So, I think the Abbas government is still in control of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank.
I guess that was my question: is where is? So we're talking about Hamas and Gaza,
right?
But is Hamas and Gaza also controlling other Palestinians just focused in Gaza?
So we only hear about them in Gaza right now, so I don't know, but it seems like they're mostly in Gaza.
Because there's also is it Hezbollah?
So they are in Lebanon.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're a different kind of force. They are, I believe, a Shiite force that has actually more that's more
direct ties to Iran.
More direct ties to Iran. Yeah, exactly.
And I don't know if we explicitly mentioned that in this episode, but that's one of the things that there's been a lot of speculation, maybe stronger than speculation about, is that the Hamas's actions were supported possibly with funding and training and logistics by Iran, in theory, because this is an opportunity for Iran to destabilize the Israeli Saudi Arabian normalizations of diplomatic ties, which they don't want to see either Israel or Saudi Arabia in a stronger position in the Middle East, because that would threaten their position as a regional power.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like a very logical explanation. On one hand, it works. On the one hand, it worked. On the other hand, it kind of shows that strategy, that's being pursued by Israel, is being pursued by Netanyahu, which was the Saudi deal, was working. It was getting close, so they had to do this. Okay, so the next question I have is, so we have this ground invasion. Let's say it's successful, but what happens next? Who's going to control this if not Hamas? Somebody needs to administer.
A big chunk of that depends on what does successful mean here.
Right. I mean,
and that's a problem that we as Americans should be very familiar with, is if you don't define your criteria for success well before you begin a military operation, you end up spending 20 years in Afghanistan and then leaving and having see your impact wiped out in weeks or months.
Yeah, no, there has to actually be some organization in control of the situation there. And I hate to be calling for kind of like a sort of authoritarian system. It doesn't have to be that authoritarian, but there has to be someone in charge who can, keep the peace. I almost feel like it's got to be like a British in Hong Kong situation where they're just lightly administering very simple trade law, and just let people pursue their economic activity and some of their social activity and try to be hands off. But doing that in Hong Kong is one thing. Doing that in the Gaza Strip is another thing.
And also when that was done in Hong Kong, the world was a very different place.
Yeah.
Times have changed.
Here's another example that I was thinking about the other day. And again, I wish I had. I'm sure we'll get guests or guests or listeners for everyone out there who please let us know if you know more about these situations than we do and can shed some light on this. But I was thinking about the Rwandan genocide in the 90s. And, if you want to see a movie on that, Hotel Rwanda is very good. But there is, after that genocide, eventually that got kind of petered out, and then the Tutsis came in and came back into power. And their president was, I think, Paul Kagame is his name. He's still president in Rwanda. So he's been there 30 years. This is not this is not like a democratic regime, but the country's done very well. And so,
and I don't know if they were the first, but I believe they were one of the pioneers in the whole, kind of Truth and Reconciliation Commission concept. And it seems to have worked well there.
Yeah,
I'm worried that we're dealing with feuds that go back even longer in Israel, but
right.
that being said, I don't know that much in depth about the Rwandan genocide and
right.
regional history.
So yeah, exactly. So it is possible to get something under control, but the problem with the Gaza Strip is that nobody seems to want to do it. The Egyptians in their peace deal got back the Sinai Peninsula. There's a reason why they didn't take back the Gaza Strip. From what I can tell, they either didn't want it or didn't want it that badly. I don't know if it was Israel saying like, no way you could have this. I don't think it was, but I've tried to look into that point in history, which is very interesting.
Yeah, well, and there's a perception certainly that the rest of the Arab world cares deeply about the existence of a Palestinian state, but not so much about the people who actually live in Palestine. And so that makes for a very toxic dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, despite what people are saying, Gaza City is still going to be there, I think, in a month. I don't think it's the kind of thing where, it's just going to be wiped off the map. That's not what's happening.
There's certainly been some rhetoric to that point, but I don't think either side is I don't think the IDF is realistically considering glassing Gaza and making it uninhabitable.
Yeah, fortunately, that would be.
There was very early on, I think, some concern of what do we have to do to make sure that the Israelis don't literally go to the nuclear alternative here. I don't think that was necessarily a high risk at the moment, but when this was initially unfolding, nobody knew how far it was going to go and how bad it was going to get.
I think that most of that talk is from like yahoos in the US. Like, I'm thinking back to re-listening to Howard Stern after 9/11, where he did call for the entire Middle East to be turned into glass. So that is, by the way, do bombs actually turn this stuff into glass, or is it just rubble that you can't really? I
believe
now as an engineer, as a mechanical, physical, chemistry engineer, I don't know what you do. You might have some insight into this, but
I believe in certain parts of the American Southwest, around Nevada and the test ranges there, where in the 1940s and 50s we were setting off a bunch of our own test weapons. That there are portions of the desert which have, I think it's called trinitite, but it's basically the sand has been turned into radioactive glass. And it's not like, it's just a like an ice rink type scenario, but there are like chunks of it. And I think, I don't know if you still can, but at one point you could certainly go on like tours to these test sites and look at it. And they had to tell people to, don't take home the radioactive glass. It is not safe to do so.
Yeah. All right. Well, fortunately, this is not going to happen in Gaza, but unfortunately, there's going to be some very deadly fighting there. And I almost feel like, this situation has been allowed to fester for so many years without any real solution that, unfortunately, this solution of force is the it is the is kind of the is kind of inevitable, which sucks, but I don't know any other way of thinking about it. All right, so that is part one of this discussion. I hope that was helpful for some of you out there, and I hope everyone is all right. Take care of yourselves. Next week, we're going to dive right into part two of this discussion, where we're going to talk about the reaction to these developments in the United States and in the rest of the world. Stuff like a little bit more like, American politics centrics, our universities, things like that. My Zoom call with Yale, all that good stuff. So stay tuned for next week on the Local Maximum. Have a great week, everyone. That's the show. To support the Local Maximum, sign up for exclusive content and our online community at maximum.locals.com. The Local Maximum is available wherever podcasts are found. If you want to keep up, remember to subscribe on your podcast app. Also, check out the website with show notes and additional materials at localmaxradio.com. If you want to contact me, the host, send an email to localmaxradio@gmail.com. Have a great week.
Feel the power.